Díosíd a cóirde agus fáilte romh go léir go dtí Caisleán Malahide ar lá, Colin an seo. So behind me you can see Malahide Castle. We're on Malahide, the grounds of Malahide Domain, which is now thankfully a public park. But the land around here was originally granted to the Talbot family by Henry II in 1177, and it remained in the family for about 800 years, so the longest continuous existences of a Norman family in Ireland. There was a little break for about 12 years when Oliver Cromwell gave the land on the castle to a man called Miles Corbett, the regicide Miles Corbett. He was one of the people that signed the death warrant of Charles II. So originally it started off as a motte and bailey, as a lot of these castles did. Then there was a 12th century tower house, so a square tower house. The great hall of the tower house is still fully intact in there. It's wood panelled and is absolutely beautiful. Over the years then with many extensions, and is now what we suppose we call as it's a regular Gothic style castle. So the last of the Talbots to live here was Lady Mary Rose Talbot, and she actually left the castle and sold it to the Irish government in about 1972 when she moved over to Malahide in Tasmania. And before her, the castle was in the hands of Miles Talbot, and Miles Talbot was a very famous plant collector. And behind us here we have, thanks Liam, his private gardens where he collected plants from all over the world. Okay, now the reason we're here is not actually to look at Malahide Castle itself, it's to look at Malahide Abbey, which is around the corner. And the reason we're looking at Malahide Abbey is because that is where one of Malahide's most famous residents resides, and that is Lady Maud Plunkett. And she's also known as the Bride of Malahide, or the White Lady. So without further ado, if you'd like to follow me. Malahide Abbey dates from the 15th century, and at this end here you can see a fine triple-headed OG window, or Ogie window. You can see it there. That must have been beautiful when it had stained glass in there. Just up here in the corner you'll see a shield and a gig, and there are actually two shield and a gigs on Malahide Abbey. I have no idea where the other one is. They're not in very good condition. I think they're made of sandstone. Gravestones in here date from about the from the 18th to the mid 20th century, and behind it there you'll see a magnificent yew tree. So yew trees are usually found in churchyards in Ireland and Britain, the berries being poisonous to cattle, so it stopped the cattle getting in there and eating all the grass around the graves. The yew tree, I think, is our only native evergreen. So the church stood here till the middle of the 16th century, when the aforementioned Miles Talbot de-roofed it, used the lead for bullets, and then used the church itself, or the abbey itself, as a barn. And it's stayed that way ever since. It was the parish church of Malahide till the late 18th century, but Sir John Talbot deemed it as being unhealthy. As the castle expanded, it got nearer and nearer to the graveyard, and he thought it was unhealthy. Okay, so we're here to see Maud Plunkett, and Maud died in 1494. She was the daughter of Baron Plunkett of Killeen, and she married Sir Walter Hussey, Lord Galtram, in the 15th century. Sir Walter was famously killed in Balbriggan. He was scattering a band of Irish, and he had just married Maud that morning. So Maud is famously a maid, a wife and a widow all in one day. And there's actually a very famous long poem called The Bride of Malahide about her. She married a second time, but we've no record of that. And then she married Sir Richard Talbot of Malahide, and he was the Lord Chief Justice. So the late 15th century was a time of great turmoil in Ireland, and there was a lot of famine, and then we were obviously affected by the War of the Roses over in England. And English rule was only in the Pale. There was no presence of any English outside of the Pale. It was too dangerous, so they delegated the power to the Fitzgeralds. So Maud, after she died, came back and is said to haunt the corridors and the grounds of Malahide. So let's have a little look at Maud. So here we are inside Malahide Abbey, and we're going to take a look at Maud Plunkett's tomb. So you can see it over here, surrounded by a fence, probably from the late 19th century. Maud is carved into this, finely carved actually, into this slab on top of the tomb. We don't know what kind of stone that is, but there is a large quarry in Feltram up the road. A lot of the local stone comes from there. Around the edges you'll see Plunkett and Talbot coats of arms. That was very, very common. What they also did back then was to carve images of saints or prayers into the around the sides of the tombs to show how religious the person was, and maybe also to remind you to say prayers to certain saints. So effigy tombs like this in the late 13th century were very, very common. Think of the knights in Jerpoint Abbey. The representation didn't necessarily depict the person that was buried. It was just a general representation. So Maud here is buried in depicted in a long dress. She's lying recumbent, finely carved on her tomb there. What is unusual for us today is her head dress. It is what's called a horned cap. That's unusual because I suppose horns are normally associated with the devil, but that was high fashion at the time. The last thing to say about the tomb here is that it's also the Talbot family crypt, and it was used until the late 19th century as a family crypt. The Talbots used to own land in Garristown in County Dublin, and that's actually where Maud is buried, and she's not buried here at all. What happened was, once they opened their family crypt here, they were obviously looking for a stone to cap the family crypt, and the tomb of Maud up in Garristown obviously fitted the bill perfectly, and she remained buried up there, but her headstone came down here to top off the family crypt. So there's the mystery of Maud Plunkett solved. So slán leat everybody, and I hope to see you on the other side. You did it? Slán.